this is going to work in this debate is that I'm going to hand over to each of our panelists who will introduce themselves and also provide sort of like a 5-minute pitch response to some of the points that Dr. Usman mentioned, as well as sharing contributions to this debate overall. And just to remind everybody, and for those of us, those who may have joined us a little later, the theme for us is markets and trade, building interconnected African markets that create opportunities for rural smallholders to urban supermarkets. So the first panelist that we have is the Honourable James Duddridge. Sir, would you like to introduce yourself and provide your remarks?
Thank you very much. I'm James Duddridge. I am not an agri-economist. My main lesson is never speak after Dr. Usman. It is a fantastic and detailed presentation. I'm Minister for Africa. When I say I'm not an agri-economist, that kind of implies that I'm some type of economist. I'm also not that. I'm the UK Minister for Africa for the whole of HMG. I've previously done the diplomacy bit of the role. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of these issues in the light of COVID, the secondary impacts of COVID, particularly agri-supply chains, which are actually critical, the importance of growth, the importance of trade, the importance specifically of intercontinental trade within the continent, the free trade area, touch on what the UK has to offer, particularly through CDC, and finish on just 3 pivotal areas, sticking to the 5 minutes. So just quickly on COVID, we pledged 774 million of UK aid to help with the pandemic. Last week, we pledged a further 190 million to help with the virus, but also and the 2 Sudans. But we also need to work on the health crisis, so pledging through the WHO, but also making sure we have African solutions and working through the Africa CDC. But I contextualize things around COVID because the secondary impacts, both on health and food security, are going to be greater than the initial health impacts. And that's where the food system is so important. And it's why we're helping fund through the IMF countries, particularly in Africa, which is why part of the COVID solution is just as much about WTO, African governments and businesses trying to minimize those disruptions to supply chains and protect livelihoods and incomes, particularly women and the youth of Africa that are a great opportunity, but are most hit by this pandemic. Some governments have reacted badly. Some have reacted fast, some slowly. Some have increased export bans, new taxes, border closures in response to COVID. These are bad moves. They've restricted the flow of food and blocking the connection from where food is produced to where it is needed. The impacts are quite frankly deeply concerning in terms of the trajectory, and we should be going in the opposite direction. We need predictable policy environment across the continent and indeed globally through the WTO, and government actions that foster competition and not get in the way. The UK is supporting African governments dealing with the supply chains through AGRA under the Food Trade and Resilience Programs, supporting agribusiness, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, that is at source through the process, and also through trade within the region, trying to maximize investment, coordination, and making sure there are benefits to the poorer farmers in particular, and women and the youth in particular within that subgroup. We also need to assist countries in developing instruments like food balance sheets that help improve the transparency and predictability of government policies to unlock regional trade. For example, we support the government of Kenya and its reform of its grain reserves. And this will improve the efficiency of government spending in the agri sector, and also, and crucially, increase the private sector investment. Much more generally, cross-border trade is vital to African growth, and we need to make sure we're not set back by COVID-19. The numbers of population doubling by 2050, Africa making up a quarter of the world's population. People talk about the benefits of this, but also the risks. And in terms of food security, it certainly is a risk. We need Africa to grow like Bilio, like Asia did over 20 years. And that needs to be clearly supported. We need to increase 2-3-fold the amount of food production in Africa and a number of other things. So Africa matters to the UK. Africa trade with the UK rose by 7% in 2018 to 30 billion. But Africa still is, let's be frank, a marginal player in global goods. And there's a lot of untapped potential. There's a lot of opportunity. Total trade from Africa to the rest of the world averaged $760 billion on average over recent years. Now compare that to Asia, which grew rapidly, $6 trillion. That's the type of shift we need. This is not incremental. This needs to be game-changing. I want to see UK-Africa trade increase, but much more importantly, Africa trade more broadly, and particularly intra-African trade. At the moment, only 16% of African exports go to another African country. I think those figures are slightly inaccurate in the sense that, particularly in food, there's informal channels and the stats don't pick up, but it's particularly important, food being a good that deteriorates, that there are fast transfers across border. And that's perhaps a good place to talk about the Continental Free Trade Area, a landmark achievement, a brilliant opportunity. When I left Africa politically in 2016 for a short sabbatical, I was impressed with the African Union, but the trade agreement was something that was going to happen in a long time. I was amazed to come back and see how fast it had moved, but a lot of the benefits of it are end-loaded. So the faster we can deliver, the better, and take advantage of the 1.3 billion people and the trade that could generate. Now, of course, we know it's a diverse continent. I will be quick if that's okay. Can I take one more minute?
One more minute. 40 seconds would be better.
We want to do more. We want to do more through CDC. There's massive opportunities. Britain is innovative. We have financial services mechanism, telecom innovation, all of which helps agriculture. DevCo helps 375,000 small family farm holders. And finally, the three areas very pithily that we need to deal with. One, predictable policy environment to increase incentives to the private sector that must invest. Two, government actions must foster competition and innovation. And three, we must coordinate globally to make sure we beat this terrible beast of COVID. Thank you, moderator.
You're welcome. And thank you for your remarks. Delighted to see the sort of, the genuine sort of conviction and passion and dedication to partnering with the continent as we move forward. And as you mentioned, sir, dealing with the beast that is COVID-19, that is here amongst us, certainly for the next few years. So I'd like to, so thank you, sir. So I'd like to hand over to Dr. Vera Songwe, who'll introduce herself and she'll provide some comments for us. Thank you, Dr. Songwe.
Thank you very much. My name is Vera Songwe. I'm the Under-Secretary General for the United Nations and the Executive Secretary for the Economic Commission for Africa. I want to talk about four things, and I think before I start, let me congratulate Usman again for a fascinating and amazing presentation. I think we didn't collaborate or exchange notes, but I think a lot of what I would say will pick up from what Usman talked about. I will put my presentation or my talk in sort of four buckets. One, efficiency, integration, innovation, and finance. Let me start with efficiency. When we talk about food systems today on the continent loses about 800 billion, just so that we can sort of internalize that number. That is about the number, as MP Doddridge has just said, of all of Africa's exports. So we are losing as much through our food systems. And when I talk about food systems, I'm talking about our production, farm gate, storage, we know that, transportation, processing, distribution, and finally consumption. If you add everything that we lose in each of the segments, 800 billion. That's a number that I think we can clearly improve on, we can clearly change. And as we do that, then we will begin to get better. Why is agriculture important and why do we continue to talk about it? And I think Usman has shown us a lot about that. 25% of Africa's GDP comes from agriculture, 70% of our labor force. We're now in COVID, we're talking about the importance of labor force, the importance of employment. 70% of our labor force is still in the agriculture sector, 65% in the rural areas, and most importantly, it's mostly women. But when we talk about growing Africa, we always then talk about the private sector. 60% of agriculture is private sector. And we do need to think about, if we want to stand up a private sector on the continent, we must ensure that we have the right policies to ensure that our agriculture sector can do well and can do better. So for us, agriculture is really the road to prosperity. And as we do better with agriculture, we will clearly improve our prosperity. Now, what do we need to do? I think three things, as I said. The first one is integration. And then we just talked about the CFTA. And let me then break down a little bit again what Usman was talking about. Let's take South Africa. South Africa imports $88.1 billion worth of agricultural commodities, writ large. Rice. It imports rice from China, 45% of that. If you think about where Usman comes from, Senegal, we've done a lot of work that shows that Senegal's rice is just as competitive, just as good, just as nice. Why doesn't South Africa import the $88 or $1 billion worth of rice from Senegal? That is what the CFTA should be doing. That's why we talk about the CFTA. It imports about 80% of its wheat from the UK and Argentina. Just imagine the distances. But, you know, it could actually get it from Ethiopia, could get it from Zambia, could get it from Nigeria. That is the CFTA, and that's what we're talking about. It imports cattle from Latin America. It could get it from Namibia. It's getting some from Namibia, but it could get more. But clearly, it could get it from the Sahel, if the Sahel could do better. Angola, 2/3 of Angola's wheat is imported from Portugal, the Ukraine, and Brazil. Distances, Portugal, Ukraine, and Brazil, it could get the same wheat from Cameroon, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Kenya. That is what the CFTA is talking about. And I think that, but when we start looking at non-tariff barriers, we start looking at the trade cost. And I'll just give you another set of numbers. Today, to trade on the continent, we are 63% more expensive. And that's why South Africa does what it does. It costs 63% more to get wheat from Ethiopia, Cameroon, Nigeria into South Africa than it does to get it from Brazil, China, and or Argentina. We have 40 different parties that you have to talk to sign your documents. We have 200 data points that you have to give. All this different sort of impediments to trade. And we hope that this is what the CFTA will be able to take away non-tariff barriers. Usman showed the slide about the non-tariff barriers, and COMESA is 1.9. But then if you look at ECAS, it's 6.7. And so then when you have the communal conversations, then you don't know which one are you honoring. Are you honoring COMESA? Are you honoring ECAS? Are you honoring? And so a CFTA should be able to harmonize that. And finally, Africa has been quite resilient on with the COVID. I think we all talked about the fact that, you know, Africa was going to disintegrate as COVID happened on the food crisis. I think, Usman, we have learned a lot from 2008, 2009. We haven't seen the kind of dramatic food shortages or the doubling of food prices. However, what we have seen is an incredible disruption in supply chains because of cross-border trade agreements. 38 countries closed their borders, 17 closed their ports, and that made trade quite difficult for the agricultural sector. So we need to do better on that. And finally, finance. We've been talking about it, the Economic Commission for Africa. Countries need liquidity, but also, as I said, 70% of our agricultural sector is actually private sector. And that private sector needs resources. They need additional resources to be able to invest. When we talk about productivity, if we increase our productivity, we can increase our yields and our incomes by $100 billion. But we do need to first invest. And to first invest, we need additional capital. That is why I'm very happy to hear the UK say they're putting more capital in, because official development assistance to agriculture is going down. It's only been 6% over the last 5 years, but it's going down. We have an overall 8% drop in official development assistance. We hope not for agriculture. Multilateral development banks are decreasing their support to agriculture because of COVID, rightly so. But I think that is also then going to create a much shortage in agricultural investments, which we need to stand up jobs again, because the segment that is going to actually get jobs back going for the continent is the agricultural sector. So this final component of finance matched with innovation and technology, I think, is going to be particularly important as we look at building back better, as we look at coming back. So I think we continue to ask, as the Economic Commission for Africa, since the minister is here, give us the special drawing rights so we can give it to our private sector, give some more resources to our private sector, $100 billion to Africa to help fight COVID, and hopefully some of that will go to the agriculture sector. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hasongwe, and thank you for laying out those statistics in that way. I mean, when you hear the statistics that we're doing this trade with other parts of the world, when we have these resources, and we can do intra-Africa trade amongst the different African countries. It's really quite stark, and it really shows the opportunity and the good work that the CFTA is doing in moving towards that. So thank you so much. That was a really brilliant statistics in this debate. So I'd like to move on next, please, if I may, to Dr. Professor Arama, President of Afreximbank. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are you hearing me?
Hearing you clearly.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much. I'm Benedict Orama. I'm the president of African Export-Import Bank based in Cairo. African Export-Import Bank is a multilateral trade finance bank, the Pan-African Exim Bank, which is focused on trade with emphasis on promoting intra-regional trade. So this event is very, very important to us, and I thank the organizers for putting it together and for inviting us to speak. At this time of the COVID-19 pandemic, there are many things that have become obvious to our continent. Of course, the issue of food security has always been there, but I think that has now been magnified by the pandemic. COVID-19 has taught Africa the hard way, very, very hard and bitter lessons of the adverse consequences of over-reliance on others for the continent's economic fortunes and social safety net. It's also taught us about the importance of continental integration. It has created the need for Africa to build strong intra-regional supply chains and the urgent need to rapidly increase investments in critical sectors such as agriculture, agro-processing, and light manufacturing. It is imperative that we strengthen our domestic economy to create stable employment and minimize vulnerabilities. Agriculture can help us do this because, as many others have said, and as we saw in the presentation by Dr. Usman and as emphasized by Dr. Songwe, agriculture is critical, is central to what Africa is doing and Africa's being. There's no tangible reason actually why Africa, which has about 60% of the arable land of the continent, should go cap in hand in search of essential foods, going out to others to seek food to feed its people. We don't know why we should continue to say this over and over. Since I became a student as an agricultural economist, I've heard about the great potentials Africa has. The problem is that so many decades after, we continue to talk about great potentials. We don't seem to have realized it. In 2003, for instance, at their meeting in Maputo, African heads of state agreed to steadily increase budgetary allocations to the agricultural sector to at least 10% over 5 years. African governments reaffirmed this commitment at their meeting in Malabo in 2014. This was important because it's all well known that Africa needs 8 times more fertilizer, 6 times more improved seed, and over $8 billion of investments in storage facilities for it to become self-sufficient in agriculture. Despite these commitments, the FAO estimates that as at 2017, that our governments are spending just 2.5% of their total public expenditure on agriculture. If African governments were to abide by the Maputo Declaration, that what we have been spending will have about $30 billion in support of the agricultural sector. But we all know that this is not happening. The COVID-19 pandemic and the geopolitical tensions that are now happening, which are leading to the reordering of supply chains, which are threatening the multilateral trading system, makes it imperative that we begin to take these issues more seriously. We have to begin to prioritize investments in agriculture. We have to make sure that we turn agriculture into business. Agribusiness has to drive our economies. And again, with 60% of the arable land of the world, we can indeed move from being a basket case to being the breadbasket of the world. We also need to begin to trade more amongst ourselves based on agriculture. I think Dr. Songwe has actually dramatized the potentials. Dr. Usman actually also showed that in the charts he presented to us. If we want to grow intra-regional trade, we should base it on agriculture. Today, we import about $80 billion of agricultural products. We export about $57 billion outside the continent. If you actually look at matching products, as Dr. Usman mentioned, we should be creating intra-regional trade in agriculture of at least $57 billion. But we know that that is not happening. But these are because we have so many challenges. Challenges that range from the fragmentation of the continent, the fragmentation of the financial system, inefficiencies in infrastructure, lack of information. So at Afreximbank, we being a bank for the continent that is focused on helping solve some of these problems, have put in place a number of initiatives that we believe will help us begin to deal with this. We reckon that the low level of exports of these essential goods from one African country to another is a result of limited knowledge of what is produced or traded in other parts of the continent. Again, Dr. Songwe demonstrated that. As a result, the Afreximbank has developed a trade information portal that is driven by artificial intelligence that will help us predict supply chains. We expect that the trade information portal will become operational in about 2 months. There is an African medical supply platform which we and the UNECA and Stripe and Siwa, the UN envoy, the AU envoy for COVID-19 have put in place to help pool procurement for COVID-19 materials. We need that kind of platform to help us open the market for Africa. At Afreximbank too, we've launched working with the African Union on the Intra-African Trade Fair. We did the first in Egypt last year, which attracted more than 1,000 exhibitors. Another one was supposed to hold in Kigali this year, but because of COVID has been postponed to next year. But that provides a platform again for us to share trade information amongst ourselves. To ensure that food items meet the required quality standard, Afreximbank is also supporting the harmonization of standards. working with a number of institutions, including the UNECA, the African Regional Standards Organization, the African Union, to harmonize standards, also collaborating with the AFCFTA Secretariat, which has now become operational. But beyond that, we have taken the lead to build Africa Quality Assurance Centers across the continent. We've started to develop them. So it's not just to develop the standards, but to make sure that there's quality infrastructure so that countries can actually have those things tested, and then so that the goods can actually be traded.
Okay.
The final thing I can say about what we are doing is about the payment platform. Intra-regional trade is constrained because we have 42 currencies. That is just a reflection of the divisions we have in the continent. The 42 currencies means that the cost of transacting in African currency and in Africa is high. So what we've done is we developed a Pan-African payment and settlement system that we'll start piloting in November. That will make it possible for Africans to pay for intra-African trade in local currencies. So that will bring back trade diverted because of currency issues. And then finally, there is a collaborative transit guarantee scheme, which we are also working on with the regional, sub-regional organizations to make sure we reduce the cost of moving goods across borders. Thank you very much for this opportunity and look forward to the debate we'll be having later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Benedict Oramah. Sorry. I think what struck me the most in your comments, sir, that I'm really excited to hear about, and I'd love us to talk more about, is the trade information portal that you mentioned being driven by AI to help predict supply chains. And that's going to be operational in 2 months. That is a fantastic advancement. And that is also fantastic to know that that's going to be so readily available in 2 months. So I'd love for us to sort of deep dive into that, or certainly speak a little bit more about that when we have the debate later, sir. So thank you so much for sharing what the bank is doing. That's really very encouraging and fantastic to hear. So the next panelist I'd like to introduce us to is Dr. Ed Mbeya. If you'd like to join us, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Edward Mabaya, and I'm a Senior Research Associate in Global Development, housed in Cornell University's College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. For the past 2 decades, I have worked as a scholar and a development practitioner on agricultural development, agribusiness value chains, systems, and food security issues around the continent. It is my pleasure to participate in this great debate on a topic that is both timely and of critical importance to food security across Africa. A big thank you to my colleague Usman for an excellent presentation on the 2020 African Trade Monitor. There is a lot of good news in this report that is worth celebrating. First is the fact that Africa's agricultural exports into emerging markets have been on the rise since 2003. Intra-African trade on agricultural products has also grown steadily over the past 2 decades, with much of it occurring in regional economic communities. I'm also glad to see that informal cross-border trade in staple foods is staggering 30% of the total trade in West Africa is finally being counted. Thus, from whatever angle you look at agricultural trade in Africa, be it intra-Africa trade versus trade with the rest of the world, formal versus informal, staple foods versus niche products, the trends are both consistent and positive. Note, however, that the jury is still out on how COVID-19 will affect these positive trends. While there's a lot to celebrate here, more work remains, especially given the projected population growth on the continent. I will highlight only 5 key areas that require further attention as we go into this great debate. First, Africa needs more timely data on agriculture and trade. While the efforts by the African Agricultural Trade Monitor are highly commendable, they're not enough to meet the immediate needs of key decision makers from both private and public sectors. The need for actionable real-time data has especially become evident under COVID-19 pandemic. Governments and development partners must invest more in initiatives that collect, report, and analyze critical data across agricultural value chains. Second, our understanding of agricultural trade must include subsector issues. I know that due to time limitations, we cannot go to that level of analysis on a platform like this. However, as they say, the devil is always in the details. And it is in these details that we can uncover the non-tariff barriers to trade that are mentioned within this report. Beyond these high-level discussions, we need a well-coordinated effort that highlights challenges that are specific to the fertilizer sector, the seed sector, fresh produce, grains, farm equipment, etc. Third, intercontinental trade must be supported by harmonized policies, regulations, grades, and standards. Having worked in the seed sector development for the past 20 years, I can tell you that progress in harmonizing regional seed policies and regulations has been painfully slow. My colleagues that are in the African Seed Access Index have been tracking this progress. You cannot trade seed unless you have a common definition and standard of what you mean by certified seed. This issue extends to other agricultural products, especially as you move away from staple grains. Fourth, our trade policies must be predictable, consistent, and transparent. While all these high-level talks and commitments from the African Continental Free Trade Area are highly commendable, they're only worth the paper that they're written on if they can be reversed overnight. For example, around this time last year, Nigeria closed its borders to prevent rice imports from neighboring countries, and this resulted in massive disruptions to regional trade. Agro-food value chain actors need the assurance that trade will not be halted unnecessarily and unilaterally. Last but perhaps most importantly, regional trade is not a substitute for increased agricultural productivity. The agricultural yield gap between Africa and the rest of the world is simply staggering. For example, the average yield of maize in sub-Saharan Africa still stands at about 2 tons per hectare. That is compared to about more than 11 tons per hectare here in the USA. This is why you must continue to push for productivity-enhancing technologies such as fertilizers, improved seed, irrigation, mechanization, and also increase spending on agricultural research and development. Now, here's another sobering statistic that you all need to remember. Domestic production in Africa constitutes for more than 90% of the food that is consumed within African countries. This number should remind us all that the continent cannot trade its way to food security and nutritional security. We must increase productivity. I realize that increasing productivity has been a perennial topic for the last 50 years, and we're all kind of getting some fatigue around discussing this issue. However, we must continue to push for this, especially with environmental sustainability in mind. Climate change and global disruptions will only make our work harder in the years to come, but the price of failure is simply too great. Wherever we take this debate, we must always circle back to addressing the key issue of low productivity in Africa. I'm glad this issue, among others, is also highlighted in the 2020 Agricultural Trade Monitor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That was fantastic. And thank you for mentioning and weaving into that the importance of the SDGs as well, Doctor. I think one of the things that you mentioned was that I'd love us to go back to later when we're going through the debate is you said, and I wrote it down, you said we cannot trade our way out of this. We must increase productivity. Mm-hmm. And I think that mirrors exactly what Dr. Usman laid out in his report as well, which is fantastic. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. So the next panelist is Mr. Sven Holstetter. Can you join us, Mr. Sven, introduce yourself and provide some comments?
Thank you so much. I'm Sven Holstetter. I'm the CEO of Yara International. We're Oslo-based but international crop nutrition company. We serve more than 20 million farmers across 150 countries. In addition to my role in IATA, I'm also on the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, where I chair the Food and Nature Board, and I'm on the EXCO and board of the International Fertilizer Association. First of all, I would like to just say big thanks to Dr. Osman Badian. I always learn so much from reading your reports and listening to your presentations, and today was certainly no exception. So thank you so much for that. And also thanks to my fellow panelists. It's been very interesting to follow this debate. So a lot has already been said, and I don't want to repeat too much, but let me mention two of the most important issues as I see it. It's the need for a digital revolution in agriculture and the need to encourage young entrepreneurship. And as the report very well states, the COVID-19 has really revealed severe weaknesses in the food systems. One would think, or at least I thought, when this really accelerated early this year with the pandemic, that it would reduce the efforts in terms of everything looking into the future, whether that would be digital or focus on climate-friendly food production. But actually, what we see across the world is the opposite. It has accelerated and much more focus on climate-friendly food production, and I think that's all part of the drive for building back better. And this opens up big business opportunities, and this is why we need to engage with the youth. 5 years ago, my friend Strive Masiva and I discussed, and the reason I say 5 years ago is it was almost exactly 5 years ago, because it was at the AGRF in 2015, where we started to discuss how can we engage young people in Africa to become entrepreneurs and to become entrepreneurs in the ag space. The result of this was Generation Africa, where we worked to push entrepreneurship in agriculture, so-called agripreneurs, through what we call the go-getters. I really think that innovation is in agribusiness is the biggest business opportunity in Africa today, and certainly the one that has the biggest social impact. And this year we had 3,000 candidates and 12 incredible finalists that we listened to. And just think about it, these are young people out there that are starting their businesses in the middle of the pandemic. And this really energizes me, and I'm filled with optimism listening to these people. They are really heroes, and they need and they deserve our support. Innovation is the key word, and going back to AGRF a year ago, there was a discussion about technology, and in one panel we spoke about how great it would be to reach 50,000 farmers through digital connectivity. Well, we're a year later now, and at IATA we have reached 550,000 farmers already. So it is possible to scale. It is possible to do this with speed, and as we already heard, there's a burning need now to turn African food markets from as a net value destructor to net value creator. And I believe that this can be done. Data and knowledge are key to this. This is going to spur, and it was very well outlined already, how this will spur economic growth, how it can increase exports, how it can increase trade on the continent, and ultimately dramatically improve the livelihoods of the most vulnerable communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those comments. And I'm really delighted to hear you reference the importance of entrepreneurship and provide us a statistic that I didn't know, that it's actually growing in the current climate. I'd love to talk more in the debate about what you think what are the drivers for it growing during COVID-19 and what opportunities there are within that context to further that growth. But thank you for really highlighting the need of entrepreneurship in this space. So I'm delighted to share, thank you. I'm delighted to share that we have a new and special speaker that's joining us, His Excellency Wamkela Mine, the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area. He's joining us and he'll give us a few remarks, after which we'll go to the great debate. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you to all the panelists for their observations. I want to join others in thanking Dr. Usman for his presentation. I think the advantage of speaking last is that most of the points have been covered. And so I will focus narrowly I don't want to repeat what has been said for good reason, of course, but I will focus narrowly on part of the challenge that Dr. Usman and Dr. Song were focused on around intra-Africa trade. As you said, my name is Wamkela Mine. I am the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area, and I was elected to this position in February by the 33rd session of the Assembly of Heads of States. And again, it's a pleasure for me to join you from Accra. We have begun our operations from Accra from the 17th of August. The government of Ghana graciously provided us the headquarters for the AFCFTA Secretariat, and I'm very happy to be in Accra to start working in earnest. I think, as others have said, what COVID-19 has demonstrated quite starkly is Africa's over-reliance on global supply chains, and Africa's inability to develop regional value chains that will lead to self-sufficiency in the long term. Over many years, the African Union has developed industrial development policies. They are there. What I think has been missing, which we all agree on, is acceleration of implementation of the industrial development strategies that we require to take Africa away from this economic model, this colonial economic model that we inherited. As others have said, we export over 55% to the rest of the world. We export primary products. We are overly reliant on the export of primary products. Africa's ability to export value-added goods is very limited because we have a shallow and a narrow industrial base. That is a limitation that we have to address. And the advantage of this African Continental Free Trade Area is that it gives us the potential to confront that challenge head-on, the challenge of being overly reliant on primary commodities and the export of primary commodities. This is something that, as a secretariat, we are singularly going to be focused on, working with member states. Some of the challenges that have been pointed to, the examples and the statistics that Dr. Songwe mentions, I think are a reminder of the immense challenge that we face. There's a recent study by the World Bank that demonstrated very clearly that Africa's problem in terms of intra-Africa trade, the limits to intra-Africa trade are in the area of non-tariff barriers, in the area of SPS, in the area of a range of different non-tariff measures that undermine market access, because most of us in Africa are already members of the WTO. Our tariffs are relatively low. The range, the average tariff in Africa is between 11 and 15%, but that does not account for the low level of intra-Africa trade. What accounts for the low level of intra-Africa trade are precisely those things that Dr. Vera referred to, the SPS measures, the inability to meet standards that allow products to be imported into and to be exported into other countries. The non-tariff barriers that, according to this study in the World Bank, accounts for billions and billions of trade losses per year. And what we've done in this agreement is that we have negotiated a number of instruments that will harmonize SPS standards, that will harmonize and enable African exporters to decisively deal and resolve non-tariff barriers. Through the help of UNCTAD, we have developed a non-tariff barrier resolution mechanism that will be relying, for the most part, on the exporter herself or himself to say to the country that they are exporting the goods to, that we have identified these measures which we believe are inconsistent with the obligations of liberalization and market access in Africa. The second point that I would make in relation to how do we deal with this issue of non-tariff barriers is that we've got to double our efforts to build the capacity of exporters to meet SPS standards. We cannot wish away SPS standards. They're important for the protection of human, for the protection of plant and animal life. They are very, very important as a regulatory tool and for the protection of consumers. What we can do is to work with the exporters, to work with small, medium enterprises, to work with the informal sectors to build their capacity to export. We know, for example, that exporters of cut flowers in Kenya have been able to an extent, to overcome some of the barriers that have been placed along the path of seeking to export their products to Europe. We know that there have been vast improvements in their ability to meet SPS standards in order to access cut flower markets in Europe. We also know that in Rwanda, there are examples of women in trade who over the last few years have also done amazing work to meet SPS standards. So we have to look at all of these models and these pockets of success in terms of meeting standards, in terms of breaking the non-tariff barriers that have been pointed to as a tool to significantly boost intra-Africa trade beyond the 18% where it stands at the moment. That is how we can make a contribution to Africa's industrial development, by ensuring that we empower exporters, particularly small and medium enterprises. The other point I would make is that in order to boost intra-Africa trade, particularly intra-Africa trade in agricultural products, it has been said that Africa is, for the most part, a net importer of food products, particularly processed food products. Part of the challenge that we face is that at the borders, the customs procedures are uneven across the African continent. We now have a trade agreement that once again places the same obligations, the same standards, the same customs procedures for clearances of goods across the 28 countries that have ratified the agreement. This will enable this facilitation of goods through efficient transit through borders, will address, I believe, the question of food security in Africa. Countries that are landlocked, that in the middle of this crisis, such as Zambia and others, who were relying on countries that are on coastlines for the transit of goods, have suffered in the middle of border closures. There are now trucks that are lined up in some borders for up to 30 kilometers, waiting to clear goods of critical food supplies that for the last few months have not been able to clear the border. And so through these harmonized customs procedures, through these harmonized transit procedures, we believe that we will be able to, in the long term, address Africa's food security challenges. Of course, we have to build the capacity of the customs authorities. We have to build the capacity of the customs authorities to enforce the new rules that we have under the agreement, and to ensure that trade facilitation does contribute and that efficient transit of goods does contribute to boosting intra-Africa trade. The final point I would make is, again, in relation to industrial development. We do not aspire to have only this question of food security addressed through the means that I've just mentioned. We also believe that the key for Africa's industrialization is in part, it lies in part in Africa moving up the value chain, so that we don't produce only these primary agricultural products, that we move up the value chain to also produce agro-processing to value-added agricultural products that we will be able to export amongst ourselves as an African market. This is a market of 1.2 billion people. So and we know that the middle class is growing exponentially. So the market is there. The deficit was, as was said earlier, the deficit and the barrier was always in the rules and in the lack of harmonization and in the lack of predictability and certainty of our markets. And we believe that this agreement will go a long way in addressing some of those challenges. And if we are to learn anything from COVID-19, it is that Africa has got to be more self-sufficient and more reliant on herself by way of developing regional value chains, regional centers of manufacturing excellence, without disconnecting from the global community, without disconnecting from global value chains, because of course, no country can survive on its own as an island. So let me leave it here for now. And once again, I thank you very much for inviting me. I'm afraid I may not be able to stay much longer through the debate because I have another engagement. But I thank you and I wish you very, very good discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, for those great remarks. I hope you'll be able to stay for some of the first debate. So just to let the audience know, and for those of you who may have joined us late, thank you so much again for joining our session here. Just to remind everybody, this session is Markets and Trade, Building Interconnected African Markets that Create Opportunities from Rural Smallholders to Urban Supermarkets. Now, we have had, for the last hour and a half, or just hour and 15 minutes, we have had a wonderful presentation and keynote from Dr. Usman. Again, thank you, sir, for that keynote. And we've had some fantastic, really, really brilliant and insightful responses from everybody. And what I've loved about the responses from everybody is that everybody has spoken about this subject from the prism from which they sit within their organizations. And it's been great to hear and to know more about how we address this issue with the beast, as it was described earlier, of COVID-19. So with all those comments, I just want to say thank you very much to everybody. I would like to turn over now, if I may, and allow, I didn't introduce her earlier, but Dr. Agnes Kalibata to join us and to join us for the book launch. We have a very exciting book launch that we are launching. It's called the Africa Agricultural Trade Monitor. And I'd like to hand over, if I may, to Dr. Usman and to Dr. Agnes Kalibata to share. We don't have much time, but in the time that we do have, to talk to us about this book. Thank you so much.
So bringing these reports together, I mean, the opportunities there inside both reports, it's amazing. It's just sometimes, I mean, I've said it since I was, I don't know when, but the opportunities within the agriculture sector, the fact that we think we can actually be able to move this continent without moving the agriculture sector, the fact that we can think that we will take another path different from other continents have taken, I just completely defeats my mind that we don't focus enough to be able to move this sector forward and take advantage of all the opportunities. All what you've all done today was to highlight the challenge after challenge after challenge, and we really we already know these challenges. I don't know what we are going to do next year. We need to think about how we light the fire under people's feet, right? Just have to come up with a way of lighting fire under our feet, because we know the challenges, but also the opportunities are immense, and our continent is behind because we are not just moving fast enough. So part of that, though, Usman, is what you do, right? Putting this report out there, making sure we know the facts, making sure nobody will have an excuse of, I didn't know what was going on, I don't know what part I should be tackling. It's all laid out and the opportunities are clear. It also comes at a time when, like the commissioner said in an earlier session, the AU commissioner said, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is ready to go. It has been postponed to January from its July start date because of the COVID pandemic. But still, it's something that has amazed us with regards to how quickly people signed up to it. It's something we are anxious to see take off. So again, what you're doing here informing this report is really amazing. I wanted to conclude on...
Please, yes. we have about 30 seconds for conclusion.
Okay. So on this 30 seconds, just to recognize that this report really links very well with the work that we are doing at AGRA on regional food trade that is supported by the United Kingdom, as the minister said earlier, and again, we appreciate that. So am I supposed to say the report is now launched?
The report is officially launched.
Okay, the report is officially launched, and thank you, Usman, for the work that you do every year. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You're most welcome. Thank you for having us.